It was one of those calm evenings that made the whole street feel peaceful. The air was cool, the sky had turned a soft orange, and most people were heading home from work. A quiet calm floated through the neighborhood as a young teen named Jalen drove down the familiar road toward home. He had just finished basketball practice and still wore his team hoodie. His gym bag sat in the back seat, and his sneakers were muddy from the outdoor court. He hummed along to a slow song playing on the radio. His thoughts wandered between schoolwork, weekend plans, and the leftover pizza waiting at home. For him, it was just another normal night. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing to worry about. As he approached a red light, Jalen glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror and smiled faintly. He had just earned a starting spot on his school's team, something he'd been working toward all season. His mom had promised they'd celebrate that weekend. He imagined her proud smile and the way she always said, "I'm proud of you, kid." The light turned green, and he pressed the gas gently, but before he could get far, he noticed flashing red and blue lights in the mirror. His stomach tightened instantly. His first thought was confusion. "Did I do something wrong?" he whispered to himself. His heart began to beat faster. He slowed down, turned on his blinker, and pulled over to the side. The police car stopped right behind him, the bright lights reflecting off the back window. He took a deep breath, remembering what his mother always told him. Stay calm, keep your hands visible, be respectful. He rolled down the window, placed both hands on the steering wheel, and waited. The minutes felt long. Finally, two officers stepped out of the patrol car. One was tall with a serious expression, and the other looked younger, maybe new to the job. They both approached slowly, their flashlights cutting through the dim evening light. "License and registration," the taller officer said, his tone firm but not loud. Jalen nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." "It's in the glove box. Can I reach for it?" "Go ahead," the officer replied, watching every movement. Jalen moved slowly, careful not to seem nervous, though his hands were shaking. He handed over the papers. "I didn't do anything wrong, did I?" he asked softly. "Your car matches the description of a stolen vehicle reported in the area," the officer said. Jalen blinked in disbelief. "A stolen car? This is my mom's car, sir. I was just heading home." The younger officer circled the vehicle, shining his flashlight inside. "Who's your mother?" he asked. "Her name's Denise Carter," Jalen replied. "She works for the government." The taller officer looked at him with skepticism. "Government, huh? What department?" "She's an FBI agent," Jalen said, trying to sound confident, though fear had started to creep into his voice. The officers exchanged glances. One of them gave a small smirk as if he didn't quite believe it. "Step out of the car," the taller one ordered. Jalen froze for a second. "Sir, I haven't done anything wrong." Now, the word hit him like a sharp wind. His chest tightened. He unbuckled his seatbelt and slowly opened the door. The cool air rushed in as he stepped out, hands raised slightly to show he wasn't a threat. His legs felt weak. "Turn around," the officer said. He did. He could hear the sound of his own breathing mixed with the low hum of passing cars. A few people across the street had stopped walking, looking toward the flashing lights. The young teen felt exposed, embarrassed, and scared all at once. The officers asked him a few questions: where he was coming from, where he was headed, why he was driving that car at this hour. He answered each one carefully, trying to keep his voice steady. Inside, he just wanted to go home. He could feel their suspicion in the air, thick and heavy. No matter what he said, it seemed like they had already decided he fit some description they had in their heads. He tried to remember what his mom had always told him. Always stay calm even when others don't. Still, his thoughts started racing. Why is this happening? I didn't do anything. What if they call more cars? What if something goes wrong? The taller officer spoke again, his tone sharp. "You sure this is your mother's car?" "Yes, sir." "I can call her," Jalen said quickly. "She'll confirm everything." "We'll see about that," the officer muttered. The younger officer kept looking around as if waiting for something else to happen. He leaned toward the car, shining his flashlight inside again, checking the back seat, the floor, everywhere. Meanwhile, Jalen stood on the curb, hands still visible. Eyes stinging with tears he was trying not to let fall. Every minute felt longer than the one before. Far down the street, a familiar car turned the corner. a sleek black sedan that Jalen immediately recognized, his mother's other car. Relief and dread hit him at once. Inside that car, Denise Carter had just finished a long shift at her office. She was driving home when she noticed the flashing lights ahead. At first, it was just another traffic stop, but as she drew closer, her eyes caught the license plate of the car being pulled over. Her pulse jumped. That was her car. She slowed down, her heart thudding. Then she saw the tall silhouette standing beside it. The hoodie, the bag on the back seat, and everything inside her froze. It was her son. Without a second thought, she pulled to the side, barely putting the car in park before jumping out. She didn't care about protocol or appearances at that moment. All she saw was her child surrounded by officers, lights flashing against his frightened face. The officers noticed her approach immediately. "Ma'am, stay back," one of them shouted, but Denise kept walking, her steps firm and fast. "That's my son," she said clearly, holding up her badge before they could speak again. "And this car is mine." The officers exchanged confused looks. "Ma'am, please stay behind the line," I said. "That's my son," she repeated, this time her voice carrying a sharpness that cut through the noise. "And you are detaining him for driving my car home." For a few seconds, no one spoke. The night air seemed to pause around them. One of the officers looked at her badge more closely, realizing what it said. His jaw tightened as he whispered something to his partner. Denise stepped closer to Jalen, her eyes checking him from head to toe. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He nodded shakily. "I didn't do anything, Mom," they said. "I know," she interrupted gently, but her tone carried the weight of authority. She turned back to the officers. "Do you have any reason for this stop besides a matching description?" The taller officer hesitated. "Ma'am, we had a report that just happens to describe my teenage son in my registered vehicle?" she asked firmly. He swallowed hard. "We were following standard procedure." Denise held his gaze for a moment that felt endless. Her voice stayed calm, but her words were sharp. "Standard procedure doesn't excuse poor judgment. You saw a young boy and made an assumption. You could have asked for verification before escalating." The younger officer looked uncomfortable now, glancing between them. "We didn't mean..." "Meaning doesn't erase what happened," Denise replied. Jalen watched silently, his chest still tight but his breathing slower now. For the first time since the lights flashed behind him, he felt safe. His mother stood beside him, calm yet unshakable, handling the situation with quiet strength. The officers apologized awkwardly, stepping back. They returned his license and registration, mumbling something about misunderstanding. Denise didn't respond to that. She simply took her son's hand and led him back to the car. As they got in, Jalen could still feel his hands trembling. He looked at her and whispered, "I thought they wouldn't believe me." Denise turned the engine on and glanced at him, her expression softening. "You did everything right," she said quietly. "You stayed calm. That's what kept you safe." They drove off slowly, the flashing lights fading behind them. Neither spoke for a few minutes. The hum of the engine and the distant sound of crickets filled the silence. Finally, Denise said, "We'll talk about this when we get home. But remember something, Jalen, never doubt who you are. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone." He nodded, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The glow of the streetlights reflected on his face. Still pale from the fear, but calmer now. As their car disappeared into the quiet night, the scene they left behind lingered in the air. Two officers standing by their patrol car, realizing they had just stopped the wrong person for the wrong reason. And for Denise and her son, it was the night that reminded them how quickly calm could turn into chaos, and how one moment of courage and truth could change everything. The drive home was quiet. The soft hum of the tires on the road filled the silence between them. The flashing lights were gone, but the feeling still lingered like a shadow inside the car. Jalen stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur past. His heart had slowed down, but the tightness in his chest hadn't gone away. He could still hear the officer's voice in his head, the way they looked at him, like he was someone else entirely. His mother kept her eyes on the road. Her hands were steady on the steering wheel, but her mind was racing. She had faced dangerous situations before in her line of work, but nothing had ever hit her like this. Seeing her son in that moment, hands up, fear in his eyes, had shaken something deep inside her that no training could prepare her for. When they pulled into their driveway, Jalen finally spoke. His voice was small, almost like he was afraid to disturb the quiet. "I thought they were going to arrest me, Mom. I didn't even know what I did wrong." Denise turned off the engine and took a deep breath before facing him. "You did everything right, Jalen, everything." "But they didn't listen," he said softly. "I told them it was your car. I told them who you were. They looked at me like I was lying." She reached over and took his hand, her eyes warm but sad. "Sometimes people see what they want to see. They don't look long enough to find the truth." Jalen looked down at his shoes. "I didn't even do anything." "I know," she said quietly. "And that's what hurts the most." They sat there for a moment, neither saying much. The porch light glowed faintly through the windshield. Finally, Denise squeezed his hand and said, "Let's go inside." Inside their home, the air was still and familiar. The faint smell of dinner leftovers lingered from earlier. Denise placed her keys on the counter and leaned against it, closing her eyes for a second. Jalen dropped his bag on the couch and sat down slowly. He watched her, the woman everyone at her office respected, the one who seemed fearless, and for the first time he saw the exhaustion in her shoulders. She wasn't angry, just quiet. "Mom," he said after a while, "do you think this happens to other people? Like all the time?" She opened her eyes and nodded slowly. "Yes, more than it should." He frowned. "Then why doesn't anyone stop it?" She sighed. "That's what people like me are trying to do. But it's not easy to change what's built on fear." He tilted his head. "You mean like racism?" She nodded gently. "Yes. Fear often hides behind it. People assume, they react, and they forget to ask questions first." Jalen leaned back, letting her words sink in. He was young but not naive. He'd seen stories online, read headlines about things like this, but it always felt distant, until tonight. "I thought because you worked for the FBI, people would treat me different," he said after a pause. "Like, better." Denise gave a small, sad smile. "I hoped that too once. But the truth is, sometimes even my badge doesn't make a difference. People don't see titles. They see color, or clothes, or fear something they don't understand." He was quiet again, staring at the carpet. "So what happens now?" "I'm going to make sure there's accountability," she said firmly. "What they did tonight wasn't just careless. It could have gone very wrong." He looked up quickly. "You're not going to get in trouble, are you?" She shook her head. "No, but I won't stay silent either." That night, after Jalen went to bed, Denise sat alone in the living room. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. She stared at her badge lying on the table. For years, that badge had been a symbol of justice, something she wore with pride. But tonight it felt heavier. She thought about her training, the endless lessons about procedure, ethics, awareness. She thought about the younger officers she had mentored, how she always told them to see people as human beings, not suspects. And yet, on a quiet street, two of them had nearly treated her son as a criminal. The next morning, the world looked the same, but something had changed in both of them. Jalen woke up earlier than usual, his mind still replaying the night before. He moved slowly, not in a rush to face the day. At breakfast, he pushed his cereal around with his spoon. "Mom," he said finally, "are you really going to report them?" "Yes," she said simply. He nodded but didn't seem sure. "Will it even matter?" "It will," she replied. "Even if it doesn't change them, it'll be on record. That matters." After dropping him at school, Denise drove straight to her office. She walked in, with her usual calm, but carried an emotion her coworkers had never seen in her eyes before. She went directly to her supervisor's office and closed the door behind her. She explained everything: the stop, the attitude, the assumptions. She didn't exaggerate, didn't raise her voice. She just told the truth. Her supervisor listened, carefully, nodding slowly, concern growing in his expression. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened in that precinct," he admitted quietly. "But it might be the first time it's happened to the son of an FBI agent." Denise folded her arms. Then maybe this time it'll finally mean something. He agreed to open an internal review and contact the local department. Denise left the office knowing the process would be slow, maybe even frustrating, but it was a start. That evening, Jalen came home looking tired. School had felt strange that day. He couldn't concentrate. His friends asked him if he was okay, but he just said he was fine. How could he explain something like that? Unless someone had lived it, they wouldn't understand. When his mom got home, he asked, "Did you talk to them?" "Yes," she said. "They're reviewing what happened." He nodded quietly, not sure if that made him feel better or not. They decided to take a walk around the block that evening. The air was cool again, just like the night before, but this time it felt different, calmer. "Mom," he said as they walked, "do you ever get tired of trying to fix things?" She smiled faintly. "All the time. But I keep going because if I don't, who will?" He thought about that for a while. "Maybe someday I can help too." "You already did," she said softly. "You stayed calm even when it wasn't fair. That takes strength." They reached the corner of the street where it had all happened, where the lights had flashed, where fear had filled the air. The road looked peaceful again, but Jalen could still see it in his memory, like a scar that hadn't fully faded. He took a deep breath. "I don't want to be scared every time I see a police car." "I don't want you to be either," she said. "But fear isn't weakness. It's a reminder to stay aware, to stay alive, and to keep fighting for better." He nodded, looking up at the night sky. The stars were faint but visible. For a moment he felt grounded again. When they got back home, Denise's phone buzzed. It was an email from her supervisor. The local department had agreed to meet with her. She would have a chance to speak directly with the officers involved and the police chief. That night, as she prepared for the meeting, Jalen sat nearby doing homework. He kept glancing up at her. "Are you nervous?" he asked. She smiled a little. "No, just determined." "Do you think they'll listen?" "They'll have to," she said. "Sometimes people need to be reminded who they're serving." He gave a small smile. "You sound like you're about to give a speech," she chuckled. "Maybe I am." Later that night, when Jalen went to bed, Denise stayed awake again. She thought about the countless parents who never got the chance to intervene like she had. She thought about how lucky she was to have arrived when she did. And then she thought about how easily luck could have turned into loss. She whispered a quiet promise to herself, not just as a mother, but as someone who carried a responsibility much bigger than her own family. She would not let this go unnoticed. The next morning, the sun rose bright and strong. Jalen watched his mother leave for her meeting. Before she stepped out, he said, "Be careful, okay?" She smiled. "Always." As the door closed behind her, Jalen felt something shift inside him, a mix of pride and worry. He knew his mom wasn't just going to talk. She was going to make sure what happened that night would mean something. He didn't know how or what would come next. But for the first time since that night, he felt hope instead of fear. And as his mother drove away, determined to face the people who had turned an ordinary night into a moment they'd never forget, the story that began on that dark street was only just beginning. The morning of the meeting arrived quietly. The city was waking up slowly, sunlight slipping through thin clouds as traffic began to fill the streets. Denise sat in her car outside the local police department, watching people go in and out through the glass doors. She'd been in buildings like this hundreds of times before, but today it felt different. She wasn't here as an FBI agent investigating a case. She was here as a mother, as a woman who had watched her own son be treated like a suspect for no reason. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her blazer and stepped out of the car. The wind was cool against her face. She walked with purpose, not anger, but with a calm determination that made people glance up as she entered the lobby. The front desk officer recognized her badge and nodded respectfully. "Agent Carter, they're expecting you in the conference room." "Thank you," she said quietly. When she entered the room, 3 people were already there: the precinct chief, a city official, and the 2 officers from that night. They looked up when she walked in. The taller one seemed uncomfortable. The younger one avoided her eyes completely. "Agent Carter," the chief greeted, standing to shake her hand. "Thank you for coming in on short notice." She nodded, sitting down at the end of the long wooden table. "I appreciate you taking this seriously," she replied evenly. The air felt heavy. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall was the only thing cutting through the silence for a few seconds. The chief cleared his throat. "We understand there was an incident last night involving your son. We'd like to hear your account." Denise met his eyes directly. "You'll have it. But first, I'd like to hear theirs." The two officers shifted uncomfortably. The younger one spoke first. "We received a call about a stolen vehicle that matched the description of the one your son was driving. We followed protocol." "Protocol?" she repeated calmly. "What part of your protocol involves drawing attention to a 16-year-old who was driving below the speed limit, with no sign of evasion or threat?" The officer hesitated. We thought—" "You thought wrong," she interrupted, still calm. "You saw a young black teen in a nice car and you assumed it didn't belong to him. You didn't verify the plates before confronting him. You didn't give him the benefit of the doubt. That's not protocol. That's bias." The chief leaned forward slightly. "Agent Carter, we're not denying there may have been misjudgment, but I'd like to keep the discussion productive." "I intend to," she said, "because this isn't about embarrassing anyone. It's about fixing what's broken." She turned her gaze back to the officers. "Do you know what it's like to see your child with his hands raised, trembling, because he's afraid of what might happen next? Do you understand what that does to a parent?" Neither of them answered. The younger officer swallowed hard. The older one kept his eyes on the table. She continued, her tone steady but filled with quiet emotion. "You both wear badges. So do I. We swore the same kind of oath, to protect and serve. But that night you forgot that protection includes the people who look like my son." The room stayed silent. Even the air felt heavier now. The chief finally spoke. "I understand your frustration, Agent Carter. We will be conducting a full review of the stop, including body camera footage and radio logs." Denise nodded. "Good. I also expect mandatory retraining on bias and de-escalation for your team, because what happened last night wasn't just about one car stop. It was about how easily perception can turn into danger." The chief made a few notes. "We'll take that under advisement." She leaned forward slightly. "Don't take it under advisement. Make it policy. My son came home alive because I arrived in time. Someone else's might not." That statement landed hard. Everyone in the room felt it. After a few more questions and quiet exchanges, the meeting ended. The officers stood awkwardly, mumbling apologies that sounded half-hearted, though one of them did look genuinely remorseful. Denise didn't respond with anger. She just gave a short nod and said, "Do better." As she walked out of the building, she felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. She had said what she needed to say, but deep down she knew this was only part of the fight. Outside, she took a deep breath, lifting her face to the sunlight. For a moment, she just stood there, letting the warmth settle the tightness in her chest. Later that afternoon, she picked up Jalen from school. He got into the car quietly, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "How'd it go?" he asked. "It went as well as it could," she said. "They listened." "I made sure of that." He nodded, looking out the window. "Did they say sorry?" "Not in words that mattered," she said softly. "But actions will show if they meant it." They drove for a while in silence. Then he asked, "Do you think they'll change?" "I think some will," she said. "Change takes time, but every conversation, every challenge makes a difference." He thought about that for a long moment before saying, "I don't want people to be scared of the police, but I don't want to be scared of them either." She smiled faintly. "That's exactly why this matters." That night, Jalen couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about everything. The stop, the way the officers looked at him, his mom's calm but powerful voice in that meeting. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling something shift inside him. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was awareness. He got up quietly and went to the living room. His mother was sitting there reading something on her laptop. She looked up when she heard him. "Can't sleep?" she asked. He shook his head. "I keep thinking about it." She closed her laptop. "That's normal. I just don't get why they didn't believe me," he said. "I wasn't rude. I didn't argue. I did everything right." "Sometimes," she said gently, "doing everything right still isn't enough to change someone else's perception. But that's why we have to keep pushing." to make sure the next kid they stop gets treated with respect. He sat down beside her. You make it sound simple. It's not, she said with a small smile. But I've learned that silence never fixes anything. They sat together for a while, not talking. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the fridge. Jalen rested his head against her shoulder. Mom? He said after a moment. Yes? Were you scared? She looked at him softly. Terrified. But I didn't show it. I couldn't. He looked surprised. You didn't look scared. That's part of being a parent, she said. You hide your fear so your child feels safe. He nodded, understanding something new about her. For the first time, he saw the human side of her. Not the strong agent who always had the answers, but the mother who carried her fears quietly. The next day, something unexpected happened. The chief from the local department called Denise personally. Agent Carter, I wanted you to know we reviewed the footage, he said. Your son did everything right. We'll be addressing this with the officers involved and making some training changes. Denise thanked him calmly, though she felt a small weight lift from her heart. That evening, when Jalen got home from school, she told him the news. They're changing some policies, she said. It's not everything, but it's a start. He smiled faintly. That's because of you. It's because of both of us, she corrected. You handled yourself with more strength than most adults would have. He looked thoughtful. Maybe someday I'll work in justice too. Like you, she smiled, her eyes softening. Then I'll be the proudest mother alive. Over the next few days, things slowly returned to normal. School, work, basketball. But neither of them was the same as before. Jalen carried himself a little differently now. More aware, more cautious, but also more confident. His mother noticed it every time he left the house. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jalen said quietly, You know, Mom, when those lights came on behind me that night, I thought my life was over. She turned to him, her eyes full of emotion. And now? He looked at her and said, Now I know my life has a purpose. Maybe that's what it all meant. Denise reached over and took his hand. Maybe it did. Maybe it was a reminder, and for both of us. The street was peaceful again, the same one where everything had changed just days before. The sound of children laughing somewhere nearby floated through the evening air. For the first time since that night, both of them felt something close to peace. They didn't know what the future would hold, but they knew one thing for sure, and they would face it together. And maybe, just maybe, their story would help others see that understanding and respect are the first steps toward real change. As the last light faded, Denise looked at her son and thought about the moment she'd walked up to that scene. How close things had come, how differently it could have ended. She whispered more to herself than to him. We were lucky that night. Jalen nodded, his voice steady. No, Mom. We were meant to be heard. And in that quiet moment, she realized he was right. The station felt colder than the night outside. The bright lights and echo of footsteps made everything seem tense and uncomfortable. The young boy sat quietly beside his mother, still shaken by what had happened. His hands rested on his knees, and he tried not to make eye contact with anyone walking by. His mother, calm but clearly angry inside, kept a steady face. She had been through many tense rooms in her career, but this one felt different. This was personal. Across from them sat the two officers who had stopped him. Their earlier confidence was gone. Now they sat with stiff posture, looking anywhere but at the boy or his mother. The police chief had been called in, and he stood near the doorway, his face tight with worry. He knew who this woman was. He knew her badge carried weight. Not just because she worked for the FBI, but because her story, if told, could shake the department's reputation. The chief cleared his throat and said softly, Agent Carter, I want to apologize for the misunderstanding tonight. His tone was polite, but she could tell he wanted to end this quickly, hoping it wouldn't go further. She looked up slowly. A misunderstanding? Her voice was calm, but every word cut through the air like glass. My son was pulled over, shouted at, and treated like a criminal for driving my car home from practice. That's not a misunderstanding. That's poor judgment. And it could have gone a lot worse. The room went silent for a moment. The officers shifted uncomfortably. One of them tried to speak, but the chief raised his hand for him to stay quiet. You're right, the chief said. You're absolutely right. But I assure you, we'll review the body cam footage and handle this properly. She leaned forward slightly. I'll be requesting that footage myself. And I'll be filing an official complaint. I'm not doing this as an agent. I'm doing this as a mother." The boy glanced at her. He'd never seen his mother so composed yet so fierce. She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. Her calm voice carried more power than any raised tone could. He felt both proud and sad. Proud that his mother stood up for him and sad that she even had to. After several minutes, they left the room and walked down the hall together. The fluorescent lights buzzed above them as they stepped into the cool night air. She unlocked her car and they both got in without saying a word. For a while, the car was filled only with the quiet hum of the engine. He stared out the window, watching the streetlights pass by like a slow film reel. Finally, he said softly, "Mom, do you think they'll get in trouble?" She kept her eyes on the road. "They'll be questioned. There'll be reports, maybe even a public statement. But that's not really what matters right now." He turned to her. "Then what does?" "What matters," she said slowly, "is that you understand this wasn't your fault. You did everything right. You stayed calm. You were respectful. And you came home safe. That's what matters to me tonight." He nodded quietly, but her words didn't erase the heaviness sitting in his chest. He had replayed that moment over and over. The flashing lights, the shouting, the cold air on his face when they told him to step out of the car. Every time he blinked, it came back. And now he wondered if that fear would ever go away. The next few days passed slowly. His mother spent hours writing reports and making calls. The story spread inside the department faster than either of them expected. Soon other agents, police officers, and even journalists began to ask questions. Someone had leaked the story to the local news. A headline that read, "FBI agent confronts officers after son wrongly detained." Within a day, the story was everywhere. People online debated, argued, and shared their opinions. Some supported the mother and son. Others defended the officers. But for both of them, it wasn't about attention. It was about what that night represented. A quiet truth about how easily someone could be judged by appearance before being understood as a person. One morning, as she was leaving for work, her phone rang. It was the police chief. His tone was different this time, more careful, almost humble. He explained that an internal review had started. The two officers had been placed on temporary leave pending investigation. They had admitted to making assumptions based on an incomplete vehicle report. It wasn't much, but it was a start. When she hung up, she took a deep breath. Her son was sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal and scrolling through his phone. She walked over, sat beside him, and said quietly, "They've started an investigation." He looked up. "Will that change anything?" "It might," she said, "but real change takes more than one report. It takes people learning, listening, and owning up when they're wrong." He stared at his spoon for a moment. "I don't want anyone to lose their job, Mom. I just don't want it to happen again," she smiled faintly. "That's exactly the right thing to want." A few days later, they were invited to a community meeting. It was organized by a local group that focused on fairness and trust between law enforcement and citizens. The chief was there, along with several officers, community leaders, and local families. When they arrived, the room grew quiet for a moment. Everyone knew who they were. The chief took the stage first. He spoke about the importance of accountability and admitted that his department still had much to learn. He didn't make excuses, and that surprised her. When he finished, he invited her to speak. She wasn't sure at first, but then she stood and walked to the front. She looked around the room and said simply, "That night could have gone differently. My son could have been hurt or worse. But I don't want this to be a story about anger. I want it to be a story about awareness." Her voice stayed steady, but her eyes softened as she continued. "Every officer wears a badge to protect. Every parent just wants their child to make it home safely. If we can remember that, if we can see each other as people first, and maybe we can start fixing what's broken." There was silence for a moment, then quiet applause. Her son looked down, feeling both shy and proud. For the first time since that night, he felt a little lighter. Later that week, she received another call, this time from the regional FBI office. Her supervisor had heard about the story and asked if she would be willing to lead a new program focused on communication and bias training for local police departments. It wasn't mandatory, but they believed she could make a difference. She agreed. The first session took place in a small training room filled with officers from different towns. Some looked defensive, Others seemed genuinely curious. She began with stories, not statistics or lectures, but real stories of people she had met, situations she had seen, and the emotions behind them. She spoke about her son not by name but as a young man who deserved patience and respect. Slowly, the mood in the room began to shift. The officers asked questions. Some admitted their own fears during high-pressure stops. Others confessed they had never thought about how intimidating their presence might feel to a teenager. It wasn't an instant change, but it was progress. That evening, when she came home, her son was on the couch watching a basketball game. She dropped her bag and sat beside him. "How was it?" he asked. "Better than I expected," she said. "It's a start," he nodded. "That's good. Maybe it'll help someone else." She looked at him for a long moment. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes the hardest stories to tell are the ones that actually change something." He smiled faintly. "Guess we told one then." She leaned back on the couch, the sound of the game filling the room. The fear from that night still lived quietly inside both of them. But now it was mixed with something stronger, a quiet sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, what they went through could help others see more clearly. Outside, the neighborhood was calm again. The same streets, the same lights, but they felt different now. The flashing lights that once made his heart race no longer defined his story. Now they stood as a reminder that courage sometimes begins when someone decides not to stay silent. And in that silence that followed, as the crowd on TV cheered, both mother and son felt the smallest sense of peace, knowing that the worst night of their lives might just be the start of something better. A few weeks passed, and life began to feel normal again, or at least close to it. The boy still drove the same car, but now every time he buckled his seatbelt, he paused for a second. That night still sat quietly in the back of his mind. He didn't want to live in fear, but he couldn't help being extra careful. He checked his mirrors more often, followed every rule, and drove a little slower than before. His mother noticed it but didn't push him. She knew healing takes time. The town had changed too. The story had left its mark and people were still talking about it. Some shared support, others asked questions, and some just wanted to understand. The local newspaper printed a follow-up article about the new community programs starting between police officers and residents. It mentioned her by title, but more importantly, it talked about what that night had taught everyone. That trust between the public and the police isn't built by policy alone, but by human connection. One morning she received an email from the police chief. He thanked her for speaking at the community event, and told her that the first batch of officers had completed her workshop. He said it had opened their eyes and changed the way they saw interactions on the street. She smiled when she read that. It was a small step, but a real one. Sometimes small steps are how change begins. Later that evening, as she cooked dinner, her son walked into the kitchen with his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Mom," he said, "my teacher asked if you'd come to school one day and talk about what happened." "You don't have to if you don't want to." She looked up surprised. "Talk about it at school?" "Yeah. They're doing a project on social awareness and real-life stories. The teacher said maybe hearing from you could help people understand both sides better." She stirred the pot quietly for a moment, thinking. "You know," she said, "I don't really like talking about that night, but if it helps others see things differently, maybe I should." He nodded, unsure if she'd actually go through with it. But a week later, she did. The classroom was full of students who usually fidgeted and whispered during guest talks, but this time, they were quiet. She stood in front of them in her plain work clothes, not as an agent, but as a parent. Her son sat near the back watching her closely. She spoke softly but clearly, telling them how quickly one ordinary night turned into a frightening one. She told them how fear can blur judgment, how misunderstanding can grow when people stop listening, and how respect can calm even the most tense moments. Then she said something that made everyone listen closer. "It's easy to blame. It's harder to understand. But understanding is what keeps us safe. Understanding is what builds peace." When she finished, the room was silent. A few students clapped softly, then the rest joined in. She glanced toward her son, who gave her a small nod. It wasn't about applause or attention. It was about turning pain into something that mattered. As the months went by, she continued to lead her training sessions, while her son focused on school and basketball. Life slowly began to rebuild its rhythm. The 2 officers involved in the incident had been reassigned after completing an extended training program. They had written apology letters, not forced but sincere ones. In their letters, they admitted that they had let assumptions guide their decisions that night. They didn't make excuses. They took responsibility. When she read those letters, she didn't feel anger. She just felt tired and then relieved. It meant they had learned something, not because of punishment but because of reflection. She never wanted revenge. She just wanted honesty and growth. One day, she and her son went out for lunch at a small diner near their home. It was one of those simple places with a bell over the door and pictures of local high school teams on the wall. As they ate, a man walked in wearing a police uniform. He was one of the officers from that night. The boy froze for a moment, unsure what to do. His mother noticed and gently placed her hand over his. The officer saw them and hesitated before walking over. "Agent Carter," he said quietly. "I didn't expect to see you here." She nodded politely. "Officer," she replied. He shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to say again I'm sorry. I've thought a lot about that night. I was nervous, I made assumptions, and I acted on them. I can't change it, but I've been trying to learn from it. I just wanted you both to know that." Her son didn't know what to say. He looked at his mother. She studied the officer's face for a moment. He looked genuine, almost humble. "Thank you," she said finally. "It takes courage to admit that." He nodded and left, but that short moment stayed with them long after he walked out the door. On the way home, her son finally spoke. "Do you believe him?" She smiled softly. "Yes, I do. Because change doesn't happen all at once. It happens when people decide to see things differently." That night, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky. Her son joined her, sitting quietly beside her. For the first time in a long time, the silence between them felt peaceful, not heavy. He asked, "Do you think things will really change?" She looked out at the horizon. "Not all at once," she said. "But stories like ours can start the change. People remember stories. They feel them. And when people feel, they start to care." He leaned back in his chair. "I guess that's better than being angry forever." "It's a lot better," she said with a small smile. "Anger burns fast. Understanding lasts longer." Weeks later, the department hosted a larger event, one that brought together families, officers, and community leaders. This time it wasn't a tense meeting. It was a gathering filled with open conversations, food, and laughter. Her son was invited to speak too. At first he didn't want to, but she encouraged him gently. When it was his turn, he stepped up to the small microphone, nervous but steady. "That night scared me," he began honestly. "I thought I did something wrong just because I was scared. But my mom told me something I'll never forget. She said it's not wrong to be afraid. It's wrong when people stop trying to understand each other. I guess that's why we're here, to understand each other better." The room was silent for a second, then people began to clap, not loudly, but in a way that felt real. It wasn't about applause. It was about connection. When they drove home that night, the air felt lighter. He leaned his head against the window, watching the streetlights slide by. "You know," he said quietly, "I think I'm not scared of those lights anymore." She smiled, glancing at him from the driver's seat. "Good, you shouldn't be. They're supposed to protect, not frighten." He nodded. "Yeah, maybe one day they'll always mean that." Months passed and seasons changed. The story that once felt heavy had slowly turned into a message, one that inspired others far beyond their town. A few media outlets followed up with stories about the changes happening in the community. Other departments reached out, asking to learn from their model. Her name began to appear in articles about training, but she always reminded people it wasn't about her. It was about everyone choosing to see with clearer eyes. One evening, she and her son were invited to a national conference for law enforcement and community relations. She gave a short talk about her experience, emphasizing that real safety comes from mutual respect. When she finished, a quiet round of applause filled the room. But what meant more was what happened after. Officers and parents approached her, some with tears, saying her story opened their eyes. Her son watched from the side of the room, proud. He realized his mother hadn't just protected him that night. She had turned that moment into something that might protect others too. When they left the event, they walked through the parking lot together. The night air was cool, and the city lights shimmered around them. He looked up at her and said softly, "I'm glad you didn't stay quiet." She smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes silence protects peace, but sometimes speaking up creates it. As they got into the car, the engine hummed to life and the reflection of red and blue lights from passing patrol cars flashed briefly on their windshield. This time neither of them flinched. They just kept driving, calm and steady, heading home. The road ahead stretched long and open, and for the first time it truly felt safe.